During the summer of 2023, a family of hikers parked their car at the Gold Creek campground in Colorado. Their plan was to go on a hike in the beautiful Gunnison National Forest, which they did. But as they were returning, the father noticed something strange off in the woods. From afar, it simply looked like your typical campsite. But as he walked closer and closer to the blue tent that was in the heart of the campsite, a wave of dread rushed over him. The campsite was covered with trash. This is disgusting, but human feces were piled up only feet away from the entrance of the tent. The smell of this site was just nothing short of foul. Who had pitched this tent? Why were they there? And what the hell had happened to him? I mean, these are the questions that were bouncing around the man's head as he contemplated what he should do next. Should he unzip the tent door and look at what was inside? It's a good question, and it was surely one on his mind. But as fate would have it, this man would never end up seeing the inside of the tent. And that's because, out of the corner of his eye, he saw something so disturbing that he immediately fled and called police. That blue tent would end up being open the following day, and its contents revealed a haunting story, even an enraging story, a story that would raise far more questions than it answered. And so with that said, buckle up, folks, because you're about to hear the incredibly disturbing story of the Vance family. I don't usually do this, but I feel like I should start this video with a warning. This is going to be a tough one to hear, folks. It's going to be a tough one for me to tell. It's an absolute heartbreaker, especially because it involves a child. And yet, at the same time, it is morbidly fascinating, and I do think that there's some things we can learn from it. So with that said, I'd like to invite you on a virtual trip right now to the beautiful state of Colorado. This trip is totally free, but you must hit the subscribe button to cover your admission, and this is especially true if you've watched a few of my videos now. If you're already subscribed, then I appreciate it very much, and if you're not subscribed, please hit that subscribe button and help us get to our very ambitious goal of 1 million subscribers. I'd now like to introduce you to two sisters, Christine Vance and Rebecca Vance, who often went by the name Becky. Christine was less than 2 years younger than Becky, and these two sisters were absolutely inseparable. Their bond was strong, and maybe that's because they felt like they were all each other had. Their family life was very rocky, torn apart before they even reached grade school. When the sisters were just 3 and 5 respectively, their mother left their father, and she took the girls with her, leaving Becky to grow up fast and take on the role of, you know, a protector for her little sister. As the family moved place to place with their mother, who was in the Air Force, by the way, we all know that can happen when people are in the military. As they moved place to place, Becky's sense of duty only grew stronger. She was Christine's constant, her guardian and guide through all the uncertainty and all the change. So the family's moving around so much, but eventually they would end up settling in the city of Colorado Springs. But shortly before they made this move, Christine and Becky's mother would remarry, and the young girls now found themselves with a stepsister whose name was Trevella. Trevella was 2 years younger than Christine, and as the girls got older and, went into high school, Christine began to grow very close with Trevella, often joining her as she got into various high school mischief, things like smoking weed or sneaking out of the house, things like that. Trevella and Christine grow closer, but Becky was actually quite distant with Trevella. And that's not to say that the two of them didn't get along or that they didn't like each other. It's just to say that Becky was private. She never fully opened up to Trevella. She would always maintain a sense of mystery, a wall that was between them. But with her mother, it was very different. Becky shared a super close bond with her mother, one that endured as all three girls, Becky, Christine, and Trevella, stayed under the same roof long after they graduated high school. They grew up in a home that, for a time at least, seemed to be united, where the Vance sisters accepted their stepfather and began to settle into a new family dynamic. It seemed like they were on track to finally leave their turbulent past behind and build a life that was steady. But then, in 2007, everything changed in their worlds, and not for the better. Things are about to get quite sad, to be honest, and so before we get there, I'd like to just pause, take a deep breath, and lighten the mood for just a moment and tell you about Drink Element. Drink Element is the sponsor of this video. Guys, the holiday season is almost upon us. Can you believe it? And if you have a loved one who's active, a loved one who sweats a lot, then I have a great gift idea for you. So when you sweat, it's important that you replace your electrolytes so that you can avoid fatigue and muscle cramps, things like that. And Element recently launched something called their Chocolate Medley, which includes super creative flavors like chocolate raspberry, chocolate chai, and chocolate mint. This is going to allow you or your loved one to get creative with your or their electrolyte drinks. You know, you can add it to some hot chocolate or add it to some coffee, or you can even look at Element's recipe page for more ideas on how to enjoy Element with the holiday spirit in mind. Even chocolate medley aside, Element has so many amazing flavors. They even have something called Element Sparkling. You know, if you prefer some carbonation with your hydration, it's super good. And right now, if you go to drinkelement.com/KyleHatesHiking, that's drinklmnt.com/KyleHatesHiking. If you go there and you make a purchase through my link, you're gonna get a sample pack of 8 additional flavors thrown in with your order for no extra cost. I'm talking citrus salt, raspberry salt, orange salt, a bunch of cool flavors, no extra cost. You really want to try them all, and this is honestly the perfect way to sample every flavor that Element has. So one more time, drinklmnt.com/KyleHatesHiking, or click the link at the top of the description. Supporting our sponsors helps us give back, which is something I'm going to talk about at the end of the video, and it's just super rad. So thank you, Drink Element, and now back to the story. Becky and Christine's mother would tragically pass away in 2007 from cancer. And this event straight up just struck the family like a thunderbolt. For Becky, who'd always been known as reserved and withdrawn, this loss was earth-shattering. She retreated even further into herself, a silence settling over her that seemed to speak volumes. The one person who'd anchored her was now gone, leaving her adrift and struggling to find her way in a world that suddenly felt far too empty. Trevella, again, their stepsister, was quoted in an Outside magazine article saying, "Becky has always been a recluse, always kept to herself, never really liked to be around people. Our mom and her were really close, and when she passed away, it took a huge toll on Becky. I think she became a little more of a recluse, and you know, when you're by yourself for so many years and don't have many friends or anything, your thoughts can get to you." The year after her mom died, Becky would become pregnant. And the father was a man named Eric, and the two had met each other while working at Atmel, which is a computer chip manufacturing plant where Christine also worked, by the way. At the time of Becky's pregnancy, the Vance sisters were still living at home with their stepfather and their stepsister. Becky's relationship with Eric, and her pregnancy for that matter, is difficult to describe. When Becky found out that she was unexpectedly pregnant with Eric's child, things easily could have spiraled into chaos. I mean, we've all seen this happen before. A surprise pregnancy outside of a marriage often leads to tension, arguments, and even legal battles over custody or child support money. But that didn't happen here. There was no explosive breakup. There was no harsh words or dramatic fights, but something still felt off. Becky and Eric's relationship wasn't hostile, but at the same time, it was just weird. I just can't really think of another way to describe it. And take this as an example. So Becky didn't tell Eric when their baby was born. He wasn't at the hospital for the birth of his child. In fact, the only reason he found out his child had been born was because a friend of his texted him to congratulate him. Becky also neglected to put Eric's name down as the father on the baby's birth certificate. Isn't that kind of strange? Becky never like took him to court to try to get money or anything like that, but these actions were very strange. And she did also tell Eric that she didn't want to co-parent their new baby, which was a boy that she named Talon, by the way, again, without consulting Eric. And yet, despite all of these bizarre actions, Becky and Eric remained on pretty good terms. She was nice to him, but again, just like she was with her stepsister, she was just kind of distant. And then, to add even more weirdness to this situation, Becky struck up an unlikely relationship with Eric's mother, who was named Marilyn. Becky began dropping off Talon at the home where Eric and Marilyn lived, usually when she was on her way to work. As time went on, these visits became more regular, and Marilyn developed a very close relationship with her growing grandson. It's at this point that, for the second time in their lives, things seemed to kind of stabilize for the Vance sisters. But that was until late 2019, when their stepfather tragically passed away. And then, only a few short months later, COVID began spreading around the world. We all remember what this time was like. We all remember the lockdowns, the blurred lines between work and home life, the uncertainty of employment, and we remember kids being pulled out of school and placed into an impossible remote learning environment. The government's response to the COVID pandemic greatly affected the lives of the Vance sisters. Just like everyone else, they were now spending more time online on the internet than ever before, and Becky in particular began to go down the rabbit hole of conspiracy theories. All right, I'm going to try to make this as non-controversial as I can. If you read many of the articles about this particular story, they kind of make Becky out to be your classic conspiracy theory nut job, but I'm going to try to be a little bit more careful with the way that I describe her online habits, because I do think that many of us will agree that during the COVID pandemic, there were some things that were called conspiracy theories that actually turned out to be at least partially based in truth, if not entirely true. Again, I don't want to turn this into a video about conspiracy theories. All I'm saying is that a lot of reasonable people were asking a lot of good questions, and I totally acknowledge that. But at the same time, there was a fringe minority of people who took these conspiracy theories way too far and were essentially preying on the fear that the government's response to COVID had caused. And unfortunately, this is the corner of the internet that Becky got wrapped up in. After COVID, Becky began spending way more time online, and I find her increase in internet activity kind of ironic, because we all know, at least on some level, that spending a ton of time on social media isn't really the best thing. The reason I say that it's a bit ironic is because of the way that Becky handled her son Talon's privileges with the internet. Becky herself was spending a lot of time on social media, but she was firm about keeping Talon away from it. She didn't allow him to have any accounts, he didn't have a cell phone, and she tightly controlled his internet access. And while there's nothing wrong with caution when it comes to social media and young kids, I'm not saying that's a bad thing, Becky's strictness stands out against some of her other parenting choices. By early 2021, when schools in Colorado Springs finally reopened for in-person learning, Becky made a surprising choice. Instead of sending Talon back to school, she decided to keep him isolated at home, continuing with remote learning, even as life around them was beginning to open back up. Keeping Talon home from school shut down one of his very few chances at social interaction, and sadly, he really didn't have many others. Talon's father, Eric, once suggested signing Talon up for the local soccer team, but Becky dismissed this idea, showing little interest in Talon joining any activities outside the house. Once in a while, he would play with the neighbors' kids, but those moments were very rare, leaving Talon with an isolated, solitary life for such a young boy. His only consistent social outlet was online gaming, where he forged some quiet friendships with other gamers that only knew him by his screen name. Meanwhile, Becky grew more and more paranoid, and eventually she made the surprising decision to just quit her job. This left her with even more time on her hands to sit on the internet and dive deeper into the world of conspiracy theories. And to be clear here, I keep feeling the need to clarify this. I'm not talking conspiracies like, oh, maybe the virus was actually human-made. I'm not talking those theories that a lot of people were talking about at the time. I'm talking about conspiracy theories that were full on, like, the world is coming to an end, society is going to collapse, they're trying to put microchips inside of us. I'm talking about those kinds of conspiracies. But with that said, 99% of the time, even the truest believers of these kinds of conspiracy theories don't actually take like drastic measures in response. Sure, they might prep a bit, they might stock up on supplies and keep themselves informed, but it's not like most of them quit their job and then move out into the wilderness with no connection to the outside world. Those are obviously very extreme actions. But for Becky, it turns out that that's what she believed she needed to do in order to save her life and the lives of her family. Towards the end of 2021, right at the heights of the division over masks and big pharma and all the other COVID stuff, Christine Vance sent a text to her stepsister Trevella that said this, quote, "You would never guess what Becky wants to do. She wants to live off the grid." I'm not sure how seriously Christine took this idea at first, but eventually this chilling reality set in for her. Becky was dead serious. She meant business. And she wanted Christine and her son Talon to come with her. Initially, Christine did not want anything to do with this. She did not want to join Becky. She thought the idea was insane, and she worried that their lack of outdoor experience would lead to certain disaster. However, Becky played the long game, and over the course of a few months, Christine did a full 180 on this idea. Christine would text Trevella very often, venting about the struggles that weighed on her. Christine was unhappy with her body, she was wrestling with self-doubt, and she was also feeling the toll of age pressing down on her as she hit 40. Depression seemed to cloud her daily life, and it's likely that this feeling of despair played a role in her eventual decision to embrace Becky's radical plan to live off the grid. For Christine, leaving it all behind must have seemed like a chance to kind of start fresh, a way to escape the spiral that she felt trapped in. By the summer of 2022, Christine's outlook had taken a very dark turn, mirroring many of the conspiracy theories Becky had come to believe. When Christine told Trevella that herself, Becky, and Talon would be leaving to live off the grid, Christine refused to tell Trevella where they were gonna go. Trevella was immediately concerned, and she urged Christine to reconsider, but unfortunately these objections fell on deaf ears. Christine and Becky's decision was made, and no amount of reasoning could seem to shake them from their plans. Desperate, Trevella even tried to take action on her own to prevent them from doing this. Trevella made an offer to Christine and Becky. So Trevella and her husband owned this undeveloped plot of land up in the mountains west of Colorado Springs, and she said that the Vance sisters and Talon could go live on this plot of land. There was a camper parked on the property, which would provide them with some comfort and safety. They could go live there, and they could just drop this idea of going somewhere else, somewhere even more remote, with no shelter available. Becky did not want to hear it. To her, this location wasn't even close to remote enough. I mean, it had road access after all. It had a mailing address. In Becky's mind, safety meant going to a place so remote, so out of touch with society, that not even her close relatives would be able to find her. Weeks would go by, and the Vance sisters made preparations to head off into the wilderness. They got rid of the food that was in their fridge that was, gonna expire. They made plans to give their cat away. Christine even tried to gift Trevola her car. And at some point, Talon, the son, who is now 13 years old, was informed of their plans because he too started to prepare for his departure. At Becky's insistence, Talon began learning various bushcraft skills, things like tying knots or building lean-tos and trying to identify edible plants, things like that. And Talon also began saying his goodbyes, which is very sad. His goodbyes both to his online video game friends and to the family cat. Talon wrote over 20 pages in his journal, quoting his online friends' responses to his planned departure. One user wrote, quote, "No, come back." Another wrote, "Hi, if you see this, I'm crying." And perhaps the saddest response Talon recorded, quote, "Roblox is no fun anymore. It always makes me lose my best friends." But as if that wasn't sad enough, Talon also journaled about his cat, which was named Oreo. He wrote, quote, "Oreo always plopped on our laps when we were on the couch. On the 29th of July, Oreo plopped between me and mommy as we were practicing ropes and knots. During online school, I would work on the couch a lot of the time. Because of that, Oreo would plop on me. On the 29th of July, Oreo plopped on me for the last time." A few days after this journal entry, Becky, Christine, and Talon stopped by the house where Eric and Talon's grandmother, Marilyn, lived. Christine waited by the car as Becky greeted Marilyn with Talon in tow. Becky gave her a small box filled with bits and pieces of Talon's life, things like school portrait photos, old t-shirts, and other items that she had gathered from Talon's childhood. She then told Marilyn 2 big lies. Becky told her that they were no longer safe in Colorado Springs and that they would be moving to West Virginia to be close to Becky's biological father. Marilyn's follow-up questions were met with vague, unhelpful answers, and then Becky leaned in and she told Marilyn not to ask Talon about this because he didn't know yet, which was a lie. He did know. Everybody said their goodbyes, and Marilyn was left completely perplexed as the Vance sisters and Talon drove away. Becky had never once expressed any desire to go see her biological dad, and yet now they were just gonna uproot their life and move to go be near him. It didn't make sense, and Marilyn's instincts told her that there was more to this story. But as the car disappeared down the road, she didn't have a choice. She was left completely powerless. And as fate would have it, she would never see the Vance sisters or her grandson ever again. The group drove away, leaving Colorado Springs behind, venturing deep into the rugged and unforgiving Rocky Mountains. For over 3 hours, they navigated a maze of winding roads, each turn pulling them further away from civilization. The pavement eventually gave way to dirt and gravel as they entered the remote wilderness of Gunnison National Forest, following the desolate path of Forest Service Road 771. The road climbed steadily, the air growing thinner with every mile, until they found themselves nearly 10,000 feet, or around 3,000 meters above sea level. And at the very end of this lonely, forgotten road, they reached a place called Gold Creek Campground. This would be the place that they chose to disappear from the world. Gold Creek Campground is run by the United States Forest Service, and it consists of a few designated campsites, a pit toilet, and pretty much nothing else. It doesn't even have a permanent employee or a caretaker. The Vance sisters and Talon claimed one of the established sites, and they then spent the next few days scouting the wilderness surrounding the campground, searching for a more secluded and permanent spot. They eventually built a campsite that was about 150 to 200 yards east of Gold Creek Campground, and it was hidden in some dense forest with a stream and a pond nearby. It was here that the family settled in, setting up their $80 Walmart tent, along with a tarp and a few other basic pieces of camping gear. They also built a small lean-to, and this was going to be their makeshift home for what they believed to be a self-reliant life off the grid. But noticeably absent from their gear were sleeping pads. Instead of using sleeping pads, they just put down a few blankets underneath them, which is, by the way, a glaring sign that the Vance family was not going to be prepared for the cold weather that would await them in just a few short weeks. Not only would it be incredibly uncomfortable to sleep on the ground without a pad, but it would also be very, very cold. You see, sleeping pads provide essential insulation to keep you warm during chilly nights spent outside. Other choices in their gear raises even more questions. For instance, the family brought along a few life straws to help filter their water and to protect them against giardia and other parasites. And this would have been a wise choice for a normal short summer camping trip, but life straws lose their ability to filter if they freeze. Even worse is that if the filters do freeze, my backpacking viewers know this, they give no indication that they're no longer safe to use. And this meant that the family could unknowingly consume contaminated water, which was a potentially deadly mistake. They did have sleeping bags, but they weren't rated for winter temperatures. Again, they're at 10,000 feet in the Colorado mountains. They're gonna need some warm bags. They didn't have any big knives, and they didn't have any guns. If something were to go wrong for them, they would be all alone in the wilderness with no cell service to call for help and nobody to turn to. It was clear that the Vance family were setting themselves up for failure, and the scariest part is that they didn't even know it. Despite their poorly chosen gear, the family did manage to scrape by for the first couple months. They made occasional trips into the nearby town of Gunnison to restock supplies, which was an experience that Talon described in detail in his journal. His entries reveal a boy caught in this emotional tug of war, we'll say. On one side, he felt the pressure to support his mother and his aunt, wanting to live up to their expectations and share in their vision of this off-grid lifestyle. But on the other hand, it's clear that Talon was deeply unhappy with the situation that he was trapped in. His words paint a picture of a child trying to balance loyalty with his own growing discontent, a heartbreaking glimpse into the cracks forming within the Vance family's ill-fated journey. Talon wrote about how Christine had taken him to the fast food joint Arby's. He wrote, quote, "I also had a mini breakdown at Arby's because nothing feels the same anymore." And then he put like a frowny face. "During my breakdown, she took us to Safeway and let me pick out candy of my choice. I was so sad that nothing really sounded appealing to me anymore. So I picked out chocolate for mommy mostly, and then auntie suggested fruit snacks for me, so I just said okay." In October, the family made another trip into the town of Gunnison, and Becky called her father with a strange request. She asked him to immediately wire her $500, which was a request that he complied with. The Vances bought a camping stove, some food, some matches, toilet paper, and a few other items, and then they just returned to the wilderness. The brief phone call that Becky had made to her father would go on to be the last time that anybody heard from the Vances. A month later, a Forest Service ranger was on a rare patrol of Forest Road 771 when he noticed the Vance's car parked off to the side. To this ranger, the car seemed like it had been abandoned, and so he briefly searched the area to try to locate the owner, and this proved unsuccessful, obviously, and then the police ran the license plates, and they actually tried to call Becky and Christine, but their numbers had both been shut down. Marilyn, again Talon's grandmother, had also been consistently trying to reach out to the Vance sisters, wondering when they would be returning from West Virginia, but she too was never able to make contact. The Vance's car was soon towed out of the wilderness just as winter was finally settling in. Nobody knew what had happened to the Vance family until the following July, when a chilling discovery brought the entire story to light. It was on July 9th, 2023, that the father I mentioned at the very start of this video stumbled upon the horror that was the Vance campsite. Before this hiker could even open the tent, his eyes locked in on the shocking sight of Talon's mummified body curled into the fetal position on the ground. Overcome with dread, this hiker didn't dare venture any further. Instead, he simply fled the scene and immediately reported it to the authorities. The very next morning, a team of police officers, search and rescue personnel, and a coroner arrived at the remote campsite. Talon's body lay approximately 13 feet in front of this weathered blue tent that they had been sleeping in, a grim prelude to what awaited inside of this tent. When they unzipped the tent, they were met with a terrible sight. They found the mummified remains of both Becky and Christine. Becky lay partially exposed, kind of on the top of her sleeping bag, while Christine's body was entirely covered by her bag, even her face, as if she was like seeking shelter from the inevitable. This scene was one of utter despair. There was trash piled up all around the campsite, and there was also a massive pile of human waste, just a few feet outside of the tent. Among the items recovered was Christine's driver's license, which helped confirm the identities, and also Talon's heartbreaking journal. Reportedly, this journal still smelled like campfire smoke. Autopsy results were released the following month, and they were met with a wave of media attention. The official cause of the deaths was listed as malnutrition and hypothermia. It's speculated that during the month of December 2022, Talon died first, and then the Vance sisters placed his body outside the tent. Becky likely died next, after which Christine zipped herself inside her sleeping bag and just laid there until she too met her inevitable death. As this terrible story went viral, the world wanted to know the answer to one simple question. That is, why didn't the family abandon their plans once they realized they wouldn't survive the winter? It's not like they just died suddenly, right? It was very apparent that they suffered slow, drawn-out deaths. So how come they didn't seek help before it was too late? Now, any attempt to answer this question is just pure speculation. We don't really know. Maybe they tried to evacuate at some point, but then they noticed that their car had been towed and they felt like there was no other option, or they were just so famished that they were just delirious and they didn't even consider escaping. Or maybe the sisters were so stubborn and scared of the world that they just accepted their death and dragged Talon along as well. Folks, we're never going to know exactly what happened in those woods outside of Gold Creek Campground. There's really just no way to know. I really hope that none of you ever go into the wilderness as dangerously unprepared as the Vance family was. And I also hope that all of you please keep them in your hearts, as well as all of their surviving friends and family members. My give back call out this week is going to be Western Mountain Search and Rescue, who were actually part of the initial response and investigation after the campsite was discovered. I've made a donation to them, and I encourage you to do the same because this group is made up of 100% volunteers. If you've got a few dollars to spare, it doesn't have to be a crazy amount or anything. I've linked their website in the description, and I would just love it for you to join me in my efforts of giving back to Search and Rescue, who are the unsung heroes of the backcountry. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next week. If you are in the Denver, Colorado area on Saturday, December 7th, 2024, I will be doing a live podcast with Backpacker Radio talking about my experiences through hiking, various backpacking related topics, and I'll be sharing a brand new trail mystery that has not yet been covered on my channel. One more time, Denver, Colorado, Saturday, December 7th. Details and tickets will be in the description.